Okay, so I'm going to be having a look at a couple of games from the New Year Norm event that's going on in Stillorgan at the moment. I was supposed to be playing in this tournament, but since I'm not able to and I'm stuck here, I'm just going to follow some of the games instead. So I was going to look at two games from the first round. The first is between Ushin and Jason. The field is quite even, so it's going to be a pretty exciting tournament. If anyone has a particularly good event, if anyone finds themselves in really good form, they have big chances for a norm. So this game began with the French. So Jason is playing the French pretty much exclusively in classical, and Oshin is playing e4 most of the time. So d4, d5, and okay, Oshin goes for the main line with knight c3. So Jason is usually playing bishop b4, but he is also capable of playing the two other main moves, which are d4 and knight f6. So here he plays knight f6, and Oshin plays kind of this old main line, bishop g5. And I think it's a little bit less studied nowadays than the e5 lines, where usually people are knowing a little bit more theory. Um, so black players usually struggling a little bit with some of these nuances in this variation. So black played the main line, which was to take, and play bishop e7. So this is the line the computer approves the most. And the idea is basically after takes, black takes with the pawn. Black has the two bishops, even though there's some structural weaknesses been incurred on the king side. Black's going to be able to play f5. They're going to be able probably to fianchetto their bishop on the queen side. And the two bishops will be pretty strong in this position. But White will argue that they have, some squares, they have some positional pressure. Um, and potentially at some point d5 could be quite a nice break for White. So the main move is knight f3, and I think this is what confused Jason a bit in the game. The main line goes something like this: a6, g3, b5, bishop g2, bishop b7, castles, and it continues from here. But in the game, White tried queen d2, which is the second move, and it's a very subtle move. I'm not going to go into too much detail and ruin people's prep, but I guess one of the main points is what we saw in the game, that if black tries to play the same way, to kick the knight out of the center, and then try to prepare to put the bishop on the long diagonal, well, simply now after g3, black is not in time to go b5 because bishop g2 will attack the rook. So now black switches to this c5 idea, but now it's running into d5. And this is quite unpleasant for black because they're struggling a little bit with their development on the queen side. And they have a decision to make in the center sooner or later. Because if they want to play a move like knight d7, there's always going to be some potential issues on the light squares. There's always going to be d6 coming as well after white long castles. So black decides to go e5, which is a pretty radical decision. And I think that this was probably what caused Jason in the game, that he thought that this structure was reasonable for black, but it's actually really risky in the long term. The reason for that is just the weakness of some of the light squares. So particularly the f5 square is really weak for black, and it's only really defended by the bishop. It's hard to defend this pawn with anything else other than the bishop. You could maybe bring the queen over, but it's going to be difficult. So long term, white has opportunity to put pressure on the f5 pawn. So here Oshin made a bit of an inaccuracy with bishop g2. So I don't think bishop on g2 is particularly well placed because the pawn on d5 doesn't really need to be protected. I think this is kind of a complacent move, a little bit sort of superficial. Like white can play long castles, and now d6 is a pretty big threat. So black is probably going to play queen d6 to prevent that. And here white can play, for example, f4. And black is struggling a little bit to meet this because the pawn is getting blockaded. And if black plays something like e4, then g4 is coming. And black's position is falling apart. Once this pawn gets distracted and a knight gets to e4 somehow, then the queen is kicked, then the pawn goes to d6, and everything becomes dominoes. Black could try like knight d7. There's some games in the Masters base that went this way, but now the f5 pawn is under attack, and once that falls again, knight e4 and d6 is too strong. But bishop g2 came instead, and now black took the chance to go queen d6 to make sure d6 isn't coming. Knight g2, which is a pretty natural move. Knight d7. There's a few possibilities here, but Oshin played a4 to prevent b5, which makes sense from a human perspective. But I think at this point I began to fear for white a little bit, because it felt to me like black had an easier game. Black had the two bishops, black had opportunities to go h5, h4, and that white wasn't really clear on what their plan was. Maybe white wants to go f4 at some point, or maybe it's not going to work out so well. Maybe black's going to get an e4 and knight e5, bishop f6. The bishop will be quite strong here. Black has the potential on the queen side. Black has potential on the king side. The king is quite safe for black. I'm just not sure where white's king is going to go, what white's going to do, what breaks white's looking for. So I was really a little bit concerned here. And I think black could have put a lot of pressure on with h5. Because white's going to find that they really want to stop this pawn getting to h4. Because if it gets to h3, then suddenly the bishop is really quite uncomfortable. And white is going to be under a lot of pressure, because if the bishop goes back to f1, then e4, knight here, and suddenly f3 square. So it's becoming very, very unpleasant. So white might want to play h4, try and stop this. The problem now is white's pawns have become very fixed, and black has maintained flexibility with the pawns. Now if white plays f4, there's going to be a permanent issue on g3. So it's going to be difficult for white to force black to commit one way or the other with these pawns. So black might have the freedom to play e4 or f4 whenever they want. In the meantime, because the pawns are flexible, white's knights are very poor. So when you're playing with the bishop pair, you often want to have flexible pawns, because you're playing against knights, you're trying to stop the knights from having central outposts. So now the bishops are just going to develop. Black's going to build a position, prepare some b5, prepare some e4, some knight e5. I'm not clear on what white's plan is. So instead, black played a very costly move, b6. The idea was just to develop with bishop b7. But again, I'm not sure that this is a good square for the bishop, because this pawn isn't going to be much of a weakness. The bishop is probably more useful on c8, where it can defend the f5 pawn. White didn't take advantage of this straight away. White went knight d1, but black didn't punish this. Black could have played e4, which is quite strong here. Now white is struggling a little bit, because if they continue with knight e3 to attack here, then black, not that move. Black is jumping with knight e5. And suddenly the pawn is protected. Black's knight is very strong. The queen is on a good square. There's no knight c4. Black can prepare b5. Bishop can go to f6. Black is really flexible. h5, h4 is still there. So for white, it's not so easy. White can try to prepare f4, but I don't know how realistic it is. You can go castles and f4. But then black can take and start to get very active all of a sudden on the dark squares. So bishop d7, rook e8 is all coming. Instead, after knight d1, instead of knight d1, white could have prevented all of this with quite a surprising idea. As we said already, the major problem for white here is because black has flexible pawn to center, the white knights are useless. So white really needs to alter this while they have the chance. So g4. Now black's center is collapsing, simply. If black takes, white plays knight g3. Now there's knight f5 and knight e4. Whenever the queen is dislodged from d6, then white's going to play d6, and the bishop's going to open up. And there's just going to be too many tactical possibilities for white in those positions. So this position is basically just losing for black. Rook g8 was a very natural move, but knight g3 anyway. And now if rook takes g4, knight f5 is coming with tempo on the queen. So black is encountering a lot of the same problems. And tactically, the position is just not working. although it remains sharp. This g4 move was very difficult. White played knight d1, the idea of putting pressure on f5, and it paid off in the end because black just continued with their plan. Now, white was able to slowly put pressure, and black didn't really have a chance to get back in the game. Oshin started to play extremely accurately and slowly outmaneuver his opponent. h4 was a very nice move because Oshin saw that after long castles, he was winning material with bishop f3, and then knight takes f5, removing the defender of the rook. So black's position was just failing now tactically. Now queen f3, queen d6, and black's position is over. There's nothing really black can do, and Oshin plays very accurately to close out the game. Here he finds a very nice move, king b1, h6, d6. Now de7 is coming with tempo. The bishop opens up, and that's that. So the game went really strongly in white's favor at some moment, and it's because black wasn't accurate enough to punish white's inaccuracy in the early middle game. White should have played more direct to force black to commit with the e5 and f5 pawns. Then white would have had huge potential in the position. Because white didn't do this and just developed naturally, black had the potential to take the initiative and get a very, very nice position from a human point of view. The second game I wanted to look at was really quite an amazing game. I mean, this was basically an engine perfect game by white, but it's also the story of modern opening preparation. So this is Cavan against Peter. So let's talk a little bit about these players. So Cavan, obviously Irish champion, really strong player, plays very much fixed openings. So with white, he's usually playing the same lines, maybe with little deviations, but he is not jumping around too much in terms of what he plays. Black, however, is really enjoying quite deep preparation and quite forceful play. And indeed, Peter with white, I say if you look at his white games from the past year or two, is probably performing over 2300 level. But with black, he's probably performing below 2100 level. So his performance with white is just so much stronger than his performance with the black pieces, which is kind of interesting stylistically. In this game, he had lots of preparation, but maybe his opening wasn't the right stylistic choice. So knight f6, c4, e6. So black is basically, they know what they're going to get. Knight f3, d5, knight c3. So Peter could have imagined he was going to get to this position, because Cavan is going for this position all the time. And black has so many options here. So bishop b4, Peter won a game here against me with the Rogozin. c5, c6, a6, pawn takes pawn, h6, bishop e7, knight bd7, lots of moves, even knight e4. I played it in the norm last year. Peter went with c5. Now the main line is to take. In the old days, e takes d5, the Tarrasch was very popular. Not so much nowadays, although it's got a bit back in fashion. Nowadays, very popular is c takes d4 at the top level, which is pretty much trying to force a draw. But Peter plays the semi-Tarrasch, which was really popular about 5 years ago at the top level, and is a very solid opening. But I think this game shows a little bit how difficult this opening is for black. So white plays pure main line, e4, the logical move, challenging the knight in the center. Now when black trades, you can get to this position. So black has very limited space. The bishop on c8 is going to struggle to develop in the short term, and white's center seems pretty well consolidated. But if black can trade pieces, the pawn on d4 could become a target, and it might not be so easy for white to advance it. Whereas for black, the outside pawn majority on the queen side might be quite mobile, and black could get a lot of activity on the c file. So black plays takes, and check, a strong move, to exchange a pair of pieces, and then get castled. The black is playing flexibly, so they're not sure what to do with the knight yet. They want to wait and see what white does. White plays the main line, which is bishop c4. Lots of other things have been tried, but this is the main move, and remains the main move. In the old days, black was always playing knight c6 here, But at some point, this knight d7 move, I think, caught on. And it now is well established as the main line. White goes castles, and black plays b6. So just to develop the bishop very harmoniously. And really, black's position is very solid. I mean, they have no weaknesses. Long term, they're doing well. Endgames are going to be pretty nice for black for the reasons I talked about with the outside majority. For example, a king and pawn endgame, could be very promising for black with outside pawn majority because the king gets dragged to the side and the black king can eat all the other pawns a lot of the time. But in the short term, white has the center, and with central control, unchallenged central control, it gives white the flexibility to go for an attack. So white goes rook fe1, bishop e7, rook a d1. So very compact central play. Black plays rook c8, bishop to d3. Bishop to b3 was also possible. Bishop to d3, h6. We'll notice here that black is still basically on the time they started with. So black is in book. White is mostly in book, but is taking some time to decide, what to play, not to get caught in any too direct preparation. So h3 from white. And this is quite a nice move. It's a slow position, so it's a useful move for white. But maybe in the future, the h2 square for the knight could be useful to bring the rook over and start an attack, and then the knight can come to g4. Also, of course, white is getting out of any back rank issues that could arise. Black plays knight f6. Black still seems to be in theory. And here white plays the top move, rook e3. So it's a very flexible move. It's consolidating the third rank, but also it's just preparing for an attack on the king side. And black is here out of book, but they find the top move, which is queen c7. It's a good move now because rook c1 isn't possible in response. Maybe black is considering to play queen c3 and try to exchange queens. Or queen f4 could come because this square is quite weak. Also, black is preparing rook fd8. So it's just a very natural move. White plays bishop e1. This is also very natural. The rook is now covering c3. White is potentially going to try for this sort of angle on black. So black just plays rook fd8. Maybe there's going to be some tactics on the d file if white isn't careful. But white plays knight e5. So far, black has done absolutely nothing wrong. Black has played all the most logical moves. Most of the game, they've just been playing theory. And white plays knight e5, and now black has some decisions to make. And really, already, I have to say, the situation is quite critical for black. White has got a simple plan. Rook g3, queen takes h6. Or, if the king was out of the way, the queen could come into f4, and there's going to be some attack brewing. For black, it's not so easy, because they have no direct activity on the c-file. Their pieces are kind of on ideal squares. All of black's pieces seem to be basically doing fine. The issue for black is they don't have a plan. They're just trying to stave off the attack and hope to exchange some pieces at some point. What Peter did was very natural. Try to trade pieces with knight d7. However, it gets into some practical difficulties, as we see. Because white doesn't exchange, they retreat with knight g4. And now, we're already seeing some ideas of it sacrificing on the king side at some point. Here, black played queen f4 to prevent the rook coming to g3, which was quite a logical move again. And white just played queen e2, getting out of the way. I was looking earlier on at what black could have done to avoid getting into these issues, because now it's really hard for black. Rook f3, rook g3 is coming. From a human perspective, I really wouldn't like to have this position with black. Instead of knight d7, the stuff the computer was offering up here caught me a little bit by surprise. One line was queen e7. And here, white maybe goes rook g3. And now black goes king f8. The idea of queen e7 is to prepare maybe rook c7 or rook c8. And this move, king f8, is just getting out of queen h6. It's very difficult for a human to make moves like queen e7 in the face of a kingside attack because it's so abstract. And then king f8, again, it's difficult for a human to play this way. Although it makes a lot of sense. It's just you need to be a very deep prophylactic defensive player to have this sense for the position. So it's why, in modern opening preparation, it's easy to prepare concretely, very deep, but you still have to map your opening choice onto your style as a player. If you're somebody who's really good with the initiative, really good at attacking, it's not really your style to be finding moves like Queen E7, King F8. So we see Knight D7, Knight G4, Queen F4, Queen E2, Knight F8. This move Knight F8 is a bit vague, but it's hard to offer alternatives for black. I guess black should go H5 just to get rid of this knight, and then maybe try to reinforce the pawn with Knight F6 or G6. Because white doesn't really want to go E5, because suddenly Knight D5 is coming. And then Knight C3, and white is collapsing. So this is quite stable for black, with the knight forced back to H2. Knight F8, leaving the knight on H or on G4 is a little bit risky, because now white does this, and there's some threats for white. Black again has to act with H5, but it's not really so natural to force the knight out of the way when the rook is aligned with the queen and the king. Black can hide the queen on H6, where it's quite safe from any attack. However, it might not really return to the game for a while. That being said, black is threatening rook C1, which would be very, very nice to start trading pieces. So here black is doing okay. Rook C7 was played instead. This is the fatal move. So white plays E5. And now the black queen is really caught out, because knight F6 check is coming. There's no good way to deal with this. In the game, black played rook DC8, but just resigned basically here. They could have tried to sacrifice the queen another way, but it wouldn't have been very fun. So white really did nothing wrong, basically played a perfect game. And even though black played, I don't know how many moves of it, black played 17 or 16 moves of preparation and got to an equal position, they really got into trouble almost straight away from a human point of view. So I guess a lot of people are nervous about playing into preparation, or yeah, exactly, just allowing your opponent to continue blitzing moves against you by playing the same opening all the time. But if you really understand these positions and you play classically and you play critically, it can still work out even today. So I thought this was quite an interesting game from that point of view. I'm looking forward to more interesting games in this event.